Hey, this is David Comisford from EduSourced, the commercial grade experiential learning software platform. Every few months, we host a client to share insights and lessons they've learned from running their unique experiential learning programs. In this session, you're going to hear from Rick Berkey at Michigan Tech University, and his program, the Enterprise as it's called, is really interesting. It's multidisciplinary experiential learning that goes a step further than Capstone in a lot of ways. Some ways I've never even seen before. So I hope you enjoy this session. If you want to know more about EduSourced, there is a link below to schedule a demo with us. Thank you so much for watching and enjoy the webinar. I've got Rick Berkey with me today. He is the director for the Enterprise program at Michigan Tech, and Rick's been there a number of years, and he's watched and helped grow the program. But the program's even goes back further than that, so it's got a pretty long history. And I think today we're going to hear a bit about that history and hear about how the program's evolved and where it's headed next. One of the reasons I reached out to Rick, though, about this and asked him to do this session was it's a highly multidisciplinary program across pulling students from across the entire university. And it's highly student-led and student-oriented. And both of those things really caught my interest as super interesting. And I know it's something a lot of schools want to do more of, is multidisciplinary. It's one of those things like it's never seems to be enough. And I'll cover that later. I've got some survey results to share from our benchmarking survey. A lot of schools do multidisciplinary, but everyone seems to want to do a little bit more of it. And so Rick will talk about that a bit. But Rick, with that, I'll turn it over to you. And thanks for presenting today.
Thanks, David, and thanks, everyone. I have some slides to cover here, and I'll get my screen going. But I really want to have some interactive discussion too. And I, willingly took this invitation because I always learn something when I do things like this too. But hopefully you'll learn a little bit about what we do with Enterprise, where we're going, like David said, and some of the lessons learned, maybe some of the success factors that might help others that are interested in doing similar things. So I'll just jump right in here. I thought I would start with an introduction both of myself as well as Michigan Tech, for those that may not be familiar. A little bit about me. I started, as I'm finding with a lot of people involved in experiential learning, in an industry career before coming to higher ed. So the first 12 years of my career was in mostly automotive, but also automotive consumer products. So things like oil filters, air filters. If you ever changed your own oil and saw a Fram filter, that was the division I worked in for 9 years. Also commercial vehicle. I did some work with Dana Corporation. So while many have changed their own oil, not many have swapped out a drive axle underneath a Class 8 semi. But so some automotive background. Interestingly, I like to tell students that I never had a title of my undergrad degree, which was mechanical engineering. But I was a project engineer, I was a product engineer, I was a Six Sigma black belt, I was a program manager, and so on and so forth. So interestingly, when I got into Six Sigma, which is data-driven continuous improvement, statistical methods, problem-solving methodologies, it actually sparked my interest in pursuing a career change into higher ed. And some of the motivations were, as a black belt and not martial arts, right? Six Sigma. I was training and mentoring candidates through our green belt program, which was sort of the next tier below the black belt, working, very interactively with people and doing corporate training. So it sort of sparked an idea, and I guess go to 2006, and that's when I pursued a position here at Michigan Tech. For 9.5 years, I was in a corporate relations role, I would call it, but it was on the academic side, which is also somewhat interesting depending on how different universities structure those roles. But my main role was as a soft-funded position, securing support for student projects through Enterprise and our Capstone senior design programs. And I'll get into that shortly, that we maintain two types of programs here for students. 2015, I stepped into the program director role for Enterprise. And I would say even before that, in addition to being a corporate relations liaison for these industry sponsorships, I had developed and have been teaching now for several years 2 courses in my area of expertise with Six Sigma and product development. So I have a dual role as a professor of practice. As I'll get into enterprise, I advise one of these enterprise teams called Super Mileage Systems. So they work on high fuel efficiency vehicle development, and they compete in one of the SAE sponsored vehicle competition teams. And then, lastly, but not leastly, I guess, education. So timestamps on the other aspects of my career, but lifelong from an education standpoint. I always feel like I'm learning, and often through our students. But as I had mentioned, I have a bachelor's in mechanical. I'm from the Northwest Ohio, so went local, University of Toledo, and then worked my way through night school through an MBA program while working for Fram, which was part of Allied Signal, much large company, and actually then merged with Honeywell around 1999. So I was in a corporate environment, and the MBA seemed like a good next step, which it was. And then after coming to Michigan Tech, I actually pursued my master's in mechanical. And originally it was on the way to a PhD, but I guess I'll never say never, but I've sort of given up on that. I don't know that there's value based on what I want to do with my career, but at any rate, a little bit about my educational background and the Six Sigma credential, as I had mentioned before, that was a pretty intense 160-hour training program spread out over several months with a major product launch required for certification. So a real positive career-changing experience for me, as I had mentioned, how it helped spark my interest in higher ed. A little bit about Michigan Tech. People think, oh, you're in Michigan, so you must be in this hand, not this hand. We have to use our hands to talk about where we live in Michigan, but we're 9 or 10 hours from Detroit. We're way up in the Upper Peninsula there in a town of about 7,000 people called Houghton, Michigan. And the population doubles when Michigan Tech School is in session. So that's where we're at. Some people refer to it by this. I think the urban legend, or I guess this is kind of a cult image, but some college students fabricated this sign, and it's sort of it's a thing we use to describe. We're just 2 miles past the end of the earth here in the Keweenaw Peninsula on Lake Superior. So maybe more importantly about Michigan Tech, here's some metrics. We're about 7,000 students, so 5,800 undergrad, 1,200 graduate. What's interesting, that's a modest size, small to modest size university, but with 60% engineering, that's a large engineering college by any university standard. So we have this interesting dynamic, I think, of our size, small university, large STEM, large engineering base. 450 faculty, 1,000 or so staff, 13-to-1 student to faculty ratio. We take a lot of pride in our career fairs, and I think we have a lot of testimonials that people literally do come to the end of the earth to recruit tech graduates, and that's reflected in our high placement rates, consistently in the 90s, low to even mid 90s. 65,000 median starting salaries based on some recent statistics. And I would say we're continue to grow as a research institution, and that's been a conscious effort in the strategic plan of the university. 80 million in research expenditures compared to other universities. I know there's some orders of magnitude above that, but that's where we are. Some other important metrics. We can't talk about Michigan Tech in our local area if we can't talk about snow. So this past season, 325 inches, that was recorded north of us about 20 minutes or so. And yes, there actually is this physical Keweenaw snow thermometer that is along the highway on US 41. Actually, you can get all the way from Copper Harbor to Miami on US 41. For a mere 1,990 miles, but you'll see this snow thermometer on the way north from campus. Yes, there is a north from here. So actually this picture, the building on the left is the building I'm in on the 7th floor, and I get to see this view throughout the year. Yes, there's snow oftentimes, but this is a nice fall photo of what it looks like up here in the early fall. So now let's jump right into the meat, I guess. So what is the enterprise program? What is enterprise? I like to go through this pitch sort of, what do we do? How do we do it? Why do we do it? And for whom? So what we do is we provide an innovative learning environment. And I like to emphasize that we do provide the environment for learning this well-rounded skill set. So we really focus on fostering disciplinary, professional, and entrepreneurial skills. So that kind of unique combination. And we do it through the application of student knowledge and interests on client-sponsored, multidisciplinary, team-based projects, which many other programs do. Why do we do it? We want to produce career-ready graduates who are sought by employers and can create societal value wherever they may choose to start their careers. And for whom, our program is, from the outset, when we started it, has been open to first year through graduate level students from any major. I guess the caveat there is we expanded to graduate students probably 10 years ago or so, but always made it available to multi-year as well as students from any major. Kind of further defining enterprise, by definition, it's experiential. So these multidisciplinary teams uniquely working in a multi-year environment by nature of students, not just seniors being involved in this like a capstone program, open-ended, what we call discovery-based learning. And as David had led with, it's very student driven. So if you think of a capstone team maybe as sort of the benchmark, enterprise is sort of another layer above that, where there's a student leadership level, there's multiple projects happening within an enterprise, and the role of the faculty advisor, much like capstone, but maybe even more so, is more of a coach and a mentor and an advisor rather than the sage on the stage, we say, right? It's more of the guide on the side. So different dynamic between the faculty role and certainly the student-led and student-driven aspects of it. And it's industry supported. So we really rely on the industry support, like many of these hands-on learning programs, not just financially, but also the mentorship that comes with professionals out in the field, bringing relevant problems and opportunities to our students. And then I'll shift into the program design. So there's a line here because there's two components to the enterprise program. And the first one is what most people can kind of grasp initially, right? It's a multi-semester threaded project-based course with different course numbers and different sections based on which enterprise a student will join. And I'll get to that here shortly. And really different on-ramps depending on when they want to join or when they can join. Typically, they get involved before the fourth year. So it's typically a 4-semester experience, and there's some different formal participation levels that I'll define here shortly. But we make this analogy to the industrial environment. So the project work is like an employee of the enterprise. So the student is sort of earning their salary, i.e. paying us to actually earn grade and course credits to do this, but we're trying to model a job environment. And then the other piece of the curriculum is what we call these module courses. And again, like the industry environment, this is what we call personalized employee development. So the students can use this part of the curriculum, typically 1 credit short courses, maybe a shorter version of a 3-credit course that's offered across campus in these different areas, as you can see here. So we give the students a lot of flexibility to use the module courses to execute the project work better, to learn how to be better team members and how to manage and lead their organizations. So it's a 2-pronged approach, as we call it, to the program design. And I think David and I agreed, if there's like a lot of questions building up, we can take some questions, and I'll let you navigate that, David. But I do have a stopping point here soon that we can kind of touch on questions too. But
yeah, and I actually forgot to mention at the beginning. So I know a lot of you have been on Zoom webinars before, but there's a Q&A box. So as we go, if you do have questions, feel free to type them in there and we'll address them shortly.
Great. So yeah, I'll outline these formal enterprise options across campus. The first one is a replacement of the traditional capstone or senior design experience in the student's home department. So that's typically 4 to 6 credits of enterprise project work. And I guess if I back up real quick, you can see in the top here, for underclass students, it's 1 credit per semester. It bumps up to 2 credits in the 4th year. And actually the graduate is a variable credit and a repeatable course. So it gives some flexibility for a grad student to integrate these credits outside their major into their graduate degrees. But this capstone kind of lowest formal common denominator or level of participation that a student would take through enterprise looks like this: 4 to 6 credits of the project work, none of the course module credits. So the enterprise concentration is the next level up, and depending on the major, we've given academic units some leeway into defining how many credits this concentration can be, since it's their degree, not our degree. We're an interdisciplinary program that plugs into all of the academic undergraduate degrees, or many of them, not all of them, but there's a partnership there, I guess is what I'm saying. So a concentration is actually a separate major code, and I'll just use an example. So our mechanical engineering students can declare what's called the mechanical engineering enterprise concentration, and part of this is just pure logistics. It's easier for the mechanical engineering department to administer 2 separate degrees versus substituting credits between the major and the enterprise program. So the enterprise concentration is already set up to require so many credits of enterprise project work and some of those module courses I talked about. I should mention too, those between the module and the project courses, then those would substitute things like the ME Capstone course sequence, as well as some gen ed or HAAS requirements. I think most universities have some kind of a general education foundation to every curriculum. And then even some free or technical electives. And because students are opting into enterprise, it makes a lot of sense that you would swap out some of those credits. So there's no additional credits to graduation by pursuing the capstone or the enterprise concentration options. They're built in, and I'll get into the history here in a minute. And then we also have an interdisciplinary minor. So all of our minors here are a minimum of 18 credits. And where we see a lot of students choosing this are programs that don't have necessarily a concentration, but a good example is several of the business degree programs. Some of their courses are accepted on our minor, so students can double count leadership, management, business type courses, combine that with their experiential learning through the project courses, and then take some of our module courses to also earn an enterprise minor. So 3 formal levels of participation that we've developed over the years, but most of this was set before I even came here in 2006. We talk about the enterprise program. Capital lowercase is an individual enterprise, so these student organizations. So a typical one is really anything but typical. The average is about 35 students, and this is where I emphasized this leadership layer of the students and multiple projects going on. In some cases, it's almost like a capstone course of its own, with the exception that it's students from different majors and different class standings, right? First, second, third year, and so on. The average enterprise has 5 unique majors, so this gets to that multidisciplinarity. Oftentimes it can be heavy in engineering, but we have representation from all the 5 colleges at Michigan Tech. And something we've been tracking more and more is participation of women, both institutionally, but also in our program. And we're tracking somewhat with the College of Engineering, which is a large portion of our enrollment, but a little below the university average. And there's some strategies in terms of some of the offerings we have in our program and other things that are helping us. That's been trending up steadily over the past several years.
Rick, before you go any further, there was an interesting question from JD Mosslet Matchett that was really related to your last slide. So just want to jump in before we get too far ahead. How do the short courses fit into the student's degree plan? How does the registrar manage the flexibility when determining whether someone has met the degree requirements, and are those modules covered by scholarship funding? So really getting into the brass tacks of how this is integrated into your curriculum.
Yeah, so if they do the minor, there's a minor audit, right? And if they declare the minor, then that's already coded in their transcript and their degree audit, so that the software sort of tracks, right, whether they've taken the appropriate credits in the different sections of our minor. So there's a flow chart to the minor, or a degree audit of sorts. The same with the enterprise concentrations that I talked about. So in those cases, the academic department, so the curriculum committee of mechanical engineering has created a separate degree called Mechanical Engineering Enterprise. It's already got, these are the options for which module courses are accepted. This is where they count. So it's all sort of fleshed out, kind of in the on the back end, if you will. And then if there's substitutions where it's something that's not formally on there, there's a process to make a substitution. Like on the minor, I would approve that, or our office would, because we're the academic advisor for that. But it's all sort of coded in if the students declare that concentration as their major code, or if they declare the minor. So I hope that helps. And I think I had said too, so they're replacing, say, ME elective courses, or ME Capstone, or Gen Ed, or Haas Humanities and Social Science credits. So some of our communications courses can satisfy those components of the student's undergraduate degree. So there's been work to get that substitution approved institutionally.
Is that mapped out ahead of time and everyone kind of knows that
Yes.
relation?
Yes. And I would say, over the years, we're still working with certain departments to define an enterprise pathway, but these are the formal ones that all the engineering programs have. The business programs here have like an experiential component that explicitly defines enterprise as one of the options. So it's, like I said, it's that partnership of working between our program office and academic units who hold sort of the decision on their degree program and the content to work together.
And I know you're going to talk more about how that buy-in evolved, but I bet that sounds really overwhelming to some people, getting so many different sides of the university to agree to recognize credit. I mean, is it fair to say that's a multi-year endeavor, or was that something you were able to get done quickly?
Yeah, I have some slides, but I have this slide called the perfect storm. I think there were some things that just all kind of aligned early on with the NSF grant that really helped kickstart this. So I'll talk to that. It's a good foreshadowing. So yes, thank you though for the question.
Well, I know it'll be on everyone's mind, but yeah, thank you, JD Mosley Matchett. Good question.
So yeah, I was just talking about what an average enterprise, student-run enterprise looks like, and I think what's unique, what I like to emphasize, is that these are permanent organizations of students. So like a capstone course is going to flip every year, right? Because the students graduate and you start over, but these have a permanence to them, and it's much like a business environment. So they're doing not only that project level, lowest level of work, but they're also managing multiple projects and budgets that support that. And I would say even more uniquely, this is one course where students have to recruit the next members as the seniors graduate. So there's this revolving door of sorts, much like a company recruiting, and we can only retain them so long by definition. If we're successful, they graduate and they need to replenish, right, and onboard new students based on what skill sets they need, what projects they're working on, and even the culture between these enterprises, as I'll mention here. And this just shows this donut chart. Maybe a little heavy on the fourth year participation. This kind of ebbs and flows depending on certain years. We just get a high number of fourth year students, but we do have about a quarter of third years, and then maybe 10% second years, smaller number of first years, and some graduate students, not very many, but some teams really like to have the graduate level involvement. And again, these are current enrollment or last year's enrollment, just to kind of give a snapshot. This is an example of a specific enterprise. It's called MINE, the Multiplanetary Innovation Enterprise. This was a screenshot from their video from Design Expo just this past month. The resolution isn't the greatest, but what I was trying to show here was the size, right? 41 students, 5 different majors here. You can see they have a student leader called the manager, and we let the students and the faculty advisors come up with the roles and the titles. They've got a treasurer, and then they've got these different projects. At least one of them is a NASA-sponsored student competition. This project on the left, to the left of that, this adaptive boom arm, that's an industry-sponsored project with a defense contractor. And then I think these other 2 are supported through the faculty members' research. One that relates to exploring flooded mine sites to kind of explore viability. And then this trencher one is something for, I think, landing on the moon or Mars or something like that. So, but on the left, you can see what their mission is, what their focus area. So they're looking at robotic technologies for extracting and using local resources, et cetera, on lunar environments, Martian environments, and flooded subterranean environments. So these extreme environments, and they're very multidisciplinary and have multiple things going on, as you can see, many of which are multi-year endeavors.
Rick, real quick on this multi-year idea. So you said something earlier that I don't hear too often, or maybe you've never heard. And that was, I think you said permanence, but student-led, student-operated. Students need to recruit that next generation of students. But there's this sense of sort of permanence, this ongoing, this persistence. I've seen a lot of programs struggle if it's student-led. Most programs aren't. Most programs, of course, are curricular, conventional capstone. But for the student-led programs that at least I know of, it's always a challenge making sure the students that are leaving this year are helping move forward to next year with whatever that might mean. We're helping recruit projects from next year or just helping shore up records or whatever it is. How have you structured this to make sure those students care about next year when they're kind of long gone?
Yeah, and I think, it's student-led, but it's still academic for credit. The faculty advisors are recognized as instructors. So it's kind of a hybrid, right? There's still the faculty member sort of has ownership for some of that permanence and continuity. But I think when the students opt into something, I have a slide to talk about this, but they have higher motivation, I think, because they have choice and they've opted in. Nobody's told them they have to do enterprise at all, let alone join mine versus one of the other 26 enterprises we have. So they have some commitment going in. And I think as they spend, 4, 6, 8 semesters in one of these enterprises, they want to leave behind a legacy and make things better. And sometimes it's by this school of hard knocks, right? The documentation from the previous phase of the project was lacking, so they want to do something about it. So there is this tendency to want to make the enterprise, leave it better than they found it, so to speak. But it's not without its challenges, for sure. I don't know if that answers the question, David.
No, it definitely does. I mean, I
Okay.
think what I'm hearing is the students have a sense of pride and maybe almost ownership, and maybe partly because they opted in. That was a theme from our last webinar too. And not everybody I ever talk to feels like they can do opt-in experiential learning because they might not have the curricular flexibility to have that and the capstone. So they might say, well, I have to do the mandatory. I can't really do opt-in. But where possible to have an optional, a secondary track for experiential learning that is opt-in, because the boutique experience or whatever you want to call it, it just seems to have so many benefits for the students, benefits for the sponsors, which I don't want to get ahead of that on the sponsor piece, but it seems really compelling. Couple of questions just came in. Maki Habib, and I'm sorry, I'm going to attempt to pronounce names. If I bundle it, I apologize. Why the minor is associated with enterprise? Is there a specific target for using such terminology? I don't know if I understand. Does that question make sense to you, Rick?
I can appreciate
maybe why a minor and not a major, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess the program was always an enhancement, to So a flexible way to add experiential learning to a student from any major, right? So we are never trying to replace a major, and that's where the capstone swap is the lowest level. Then there's the concentration, right, with more of the module courses, and then the minor was the next level, I guess. And I appreciate too that it's kind of unique as a program, and then an employer might say, well, tell me about this enterprise minor. So we have to coach students on the design of the minor. It's really designed, if I had to rename it, and if this didn't already exist, I would take it, but it's almost like a leadership minor in my mind, because they're learning more about program leadership, this larger organization that they're navigating, in addition to that experiential learning. So our minor is sort of designed around, again, a supplement to a major, right?
It's always complementary at every step. The engagement in enterprise is complementary to the core curriculum, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but in hindsight, yeah, I think there's some opportunities, or now I know that we're looking at certificates and other sort of mechanisms by which students can have some kind of credential beyond the major. But that's sort of where we landed. And to be honest, I think it works the best for the students that don't have like a concentration option. And some of the degree programs have a lot of free electives where you could embed the whole enterprise minor into your degree program just with a little bit of planning and work with your academic advisor. So it's definitely achievable. And I think the key is, how do we coach students on the value of their enterprise experience, which we do spend a lot of time on.
And Karen Larson echoed, I think, your comment earlier, Rick. She said sometimes these activities take a lot more time than a 3 to 4 credit course, and that they are really invested, they being the students, and the program project organization feel a sense of ownership. And that makes sense. That's a key element too, is that it can be kind of a big, long, and persistent engagement. But again, for a lot of schools, their experiential learning really just is structurally limited to that 1 semester, maybe a 2 semester at most.
Yep.
But often a 1 semester. And so they might look at that and say, well, if we leave it to students to really manage a lot of this, that might not work. So they don't seem as invested. It's kind of a circular problem. If it's a longer, deeper, bigger issue, they opt into it. That's where you might get that threshold of investment where they can kind of take the reins.
Yep. Good points for sure. All right. Well, let me keep moving here. This is our portfolio of all the enterprises, all 26 of them. I want to mention too, when we piloted this program, this wireless communication enterprise was one of the 3 that we started in 2000. So if you can imagine 22 years of project activity, obviously the students have turned over so many times, but another interesting point is the advisor of that team was a student in the program, went out to industry for a while, then came back as a faculty member. So kind of a full circle perspective as an advisor to the current team for several years now. But many of these have been developed over different points in time, including like this HSTEM enterprise in the lower right. We just launched that in the fall. But this program, looking back, had a pretty steep ramp up, where it just really took off. And I'll talk about why I think that is during the time that I wasn't here, and then why it was during the time that I was here, because there's 2 different points in time there where I wasn't here to fully know what all was happening. But this really is like a diverse corporation, right? Like a multinational that has different divisions, and these teams do have different structures and cultures. So we've prided ourselves, and sometimes a strength can be a weakness, but allowing these teams to develop their own structures and ways to organize, and even, their culture, what types of students they attract and things like that. But I think that flexibility has been a net positive, but it also leads to some of the things I want to talk about with where we're going next to balance some of that out. So let me just talk a little bit about the multidisciplinary reach. So a couple slides or a couple charts here. So on the left here, enrollment by college. I had alluded to this earlier, but the program is roughly almost 75, 78% engineering students, 16% computing, a smaller number business, and then sciences and arts. This, when we launched that HSTEM enterprise I mentioned on the previous slide, We saw a lot of students in like the life sciences and health sciences. They had an option now within the enterprise program that wasn't available to them earlier. So as we be more strategic about the portfolio, we can sort of affect this donut chart, in terms of representation. And there actually is a sliver here for forest resources and environmental science. I think it's literally like 2 students, but we have a forestry, I would say, sustainable bioproducts focused enterprise. And ironically, it has more engineering students than forestry students. But again, that's the multidisciplinary component. And then on the right, this is how many majors within each of these colleges. So where we only have 4% of our enrollment in sciences and arts, we actually have those 4% come from 14 different majors within sciences and arts. By contrast, we've got, I think, 12 majors in engineering and, a high number of students. So it's just kind of interesting to see major representation by college as well as enrollment by college. And again, these were fall numbers that I pulled. Like many experiential learning programs, industry support is critical. This is some of the recent sponsors. Just to highlight a few things, Michigan Tech, by nature of sort of our reputation and location, we've got strong partnerships with automotive, but you'll see many other types of companies here too, like electric utilities, consumer products, Libby Glassware, for example, or Kimberly-Clark, I think is on here, yeah. Steel companies like Nucor and ArcelorMittal, defense companies, and so on and so forth. So a big part of having a broad portfolio, like I showed with the student enterprise breakdown, is having industry to support those diverse and broad interests.
Rick,
So
do you find it challenging to help these industry partners make sense of this menu of enterprises, or do they just kind of naturally gravitate to the ones that are a fit for them and their industry?
We definitely, I guess, what's somewhat unique too is the person in my organization that engages with industry also supports senior design. So we try to have a somewhat of a one-stop shop for student projects, and then based on what their interests are, we can help steer them to enterprise versus capstone, and then within those programs, which departments or which enterprises. So yeah, we try to start with, what are your motivations for engaging students on project-based learning, and then let's show you some of the options. And to be honest, it's a spoiler alert for a later slide, but that earlier engagement with students that aren't all seniors about to head out the door is a big motivator for them. So once they know they can do that through enterprise, they sometimes stop talking about senior design, but we have companies that support both because both programs are alive and well. But yeah, it's a good point. So just briefly, I'll kind of run through these, but looking at all the stakeholders in this program, certainly for the students, having that hands-on application and in real time while they're learning through their other core courses is very valuable, as I'm sure we all know on this webinar. I think something that's more worth emphasizing and something we spend a lot of time on is helping them develop those professional skills, the interpersonal skills. And this multi-year runway really affords some time to have the students reflect from semester to semester instead of this intense, one and you're done kind of project experience as they're heading out the door. So that multi-year piece really enables that development. The networking with both industry, but also students with similar interests, but who may come from diverse backgrounds and academic programs, is a unique opportunity for them to network and collaborate both inside the university and outside the university. And then giving students choice and a runway like this helps them cultivate and affirm their curiosity, their career interests. And sometimes, in my mind, the most successful experience is when a student in enterprise says, well, at least I don't no, I don't want to do that now after having some experience. And not that they should write things off so early, but having some experience, sometimes they might chase an industry just because that's what somebody told them was the right thing to do for their early career, but they get some experience and learn something about themselves, and they can at least be pointed in a better direction in their early career versus taking that first job and not really knowing if it's something that they might be interested in or willing to work at. So very valuable to learn that while you're here for 4 or 5 years or so. But, for the industry partners and sponsors, like I said, mentor and engage with students and earlier versus say senior only. The marketing and promotion, we have so many companies that talk about building their brand on campus. This student team here that won a few different awards at our design expo last month, they're proudly displaying their company sponsor on the t-shirts. So free advertising. I mean, the companies pay a program fee to get involved, but they're getting good visibility through the university community and through the student to student networking. Certainly there's motivations to access students for their fresh ideas, maybe faculty expertise and university resources that can be brought to bear on industry projects. But at a broad level, I like to talk to industry partners or prospective sponsors of the program about this partnership. So recognizing that we can't maintain relevance if we don't partner with industry, and likewise, if industry can provide us, where they're going and what skill sets are near and dear to them, we can be flexible with these project experiences to keep our reputation high, prepare our graduates for success, and do it across multiple sectors as opposed to trying to revamp your whole curriculum, which just is not feasible. And then from faculty advisors and mentors of these enterprises, this is a different way to engage with students where they're kind of in the driver's seat more, like I had talked about before. It's a good way to develop and strengthen teaching and mentoring. And in some cases, you could apply that to, say, graduate students or your research program. Many examples of student projects through our program have enabled networking and collaboration with industry on larger, say, research programs. I always think of one example in our biomedical area where, had the faculty advisor of the team not been exposed to the work that this medical device company was doing, they wouldn't have even thought to pursue this area of what was called bioabsorbable materials for use in cardiovascular applications. So then they started partnering with the industry sponsor on research, beyond student project level, and actually was able to go after grants through other sources. So it can be sort of a platform upon which faculty can build a research portfolio, or at least strengthen one. And then many of our advisors have used it as sort of an undergraduate sandbox to expose students to what they might be able to do as a graduate student in their program. So recruiting from within, but that's where the advisors' research interests align with the enterprise they're advising, which isn't always the case, but often can be. Just talking about the program impact. So in the spirit of time, I'll get through this. These are just some annual kind of impacts over the 20 years here at steady state. We're impacting about 20% of the graduates through this optional program, about 15% of the undergraduate enrollment as a whole, almost 40 different majors, 600,000 plus in annual external support, which goes up and down from year to year, 35 to 40 partners that we have to manage relationships with and try to strengthen and build those. Over the lifetime, we leverage this $750,000 grant from NSF to more than 10 million in external support. So a pretty good return, in my view, of the power of this program. And in NSF's view, I would say that's a big success, because many programs don't survive after the grant goes away. And I'll talk more about some of the retention and graduation rates, but those are some things that we have data on that show, whether it's the program or whether it's the students that opt into the program, we see statistically higher rates of retention, and graduation. So how did we get here? This is where I want to share some insights that may help some others, but also it's a little bit of a history lesson. It all started with this NSF award that was actually an engineering education program development grant. I don't even know if NSF does things like this now, but we had this catchy acronym reality. So it was grounded in experiential learning. It was focused on engineering, but it was multidisciplinary within and outside of engineering from the outset. And that was reflected in the PI and the co-PIs on the grant, represented by engineering. So our associate dean of engineering was the PI, but we had engineering, humanities, and business also represented on that grant. Within the first year, we developed the program and piloted it, like I said, with 3 teams, one of which is still in operation. And then after kind of getting the bugs out, so to speak, right, and learning from the pilot, it was launched the following year, and scaled up pretty quickly with 11 teams, about 200 students, and 19 majors. So there was, at the time, it was well received, and I think coordinated with the faculty involved in the grant, and the program was administered in the College of Engineering. The grant, I think, went like 4 years, maybe it was 3 years plus an extension. By this time, we had an industry sponsorship model in place. So there was a position called an industry projects coordinator at that time, that I think has always been one of the success factors to sustaining this program. And again, it's hard to kind of talk about a 22-year program in terms of these milestones, but these were some of the things that I thought were significant maybe for the audience. Continued growth and scale up, say 6 years in, close to about 700 students by that time. And organizationally, so we elevated from the associate dean as the PI on the grant to a program director to try to institutionalize this program. So by 2005 and 6, the program office had 2 full-time staff, the industry liaison and the program director. So still pretty lean, but our kind of experiment into how to manage an interdisciplinary program like this. Sort of continuing with some of the milestones. I came in 2006, so I was in engineering for a year, and then our dean of engineering said, we're going to move out of the College of Engineering. And there was good reason for this, because a lot of people across campus were saying, this program's open to all majors, so why is it housed in engineering? And there was a reason with the NSF grant and the high representation of engineering, because it's an option to the Capstone experience. But there was a decision at this time to move it out into this interdisciplinary institute called ILI that was sort of matrixed reporting into our vice president for research, where the centers and institutes report, and then the provost office, which is where the academic units report. So we worked in that environment for about 7 years, and that was a sort of a precursor to what was called the Pavlis Honors College, which it still exists today, which was sort of elevated. So an academic college that's non-degree granting, that has high impact programs that are interdisciplinary. So this was our next level of how to formalize, where do these programs like Enterprise, where should they be housed and administered? So Frank Pavlis was a donor and alum of the university that founded Air Products, the global industrial gas company. He passed away a few years ago at, I think, 100 years old. So he helped kickstart this kind of next evolution of interdisciplinary learning here at Michigan Tech. We celebrated our 20th anniversary in 2020, which was all well and good, and then COVID hit, so maybe it took a little bit of the luster from the celebration, but by this time we're operating at 800 to 900 students annually. We're still financially self-sustaining. And then just this past year, I now report under the associate provost and alongside of the Pavlis Honors College. So we kind of split those two pieces, recognizing that Enterprise is sort of its own thing, but it's at the same level as this honors college. And we're still reporting up through the associate provost for undergraduate education because we're interdisciplinary. And we spent a lot of time last summer with a strategic plan for what we call Enterprise 2.0. But in the spirit of time, this perfect storm I alluded to, we had the NSF support. Through that NSF grant was a lot of industry surveys saying engineering graduates need to have a more well-rounded skill set, like I had talked about in the beginning, which frames the mission of our program. So balancing that engineering aptitude with leadership and entrepreneurial mindset, as I think it's being called in some circles today. We had this collaboration across 3 colleges on the original grant. For those that have been involved in ABET for many years, this was before my time, but ABET EC 2000 was really ABET's sort of shift from, I think the quote is what is taught to what is learned, sort of outcomes based. And then that was like 1997, I think that report came out, and right before this grant. And then we were also changing from quarters to semesters. So we had to revamp our degree programs anyway at that time. So it really was like a perfect storm. Like I wonder, knowing what I know now, if we would be able to launch the program in a similar capacity today when I look at all these things that kind of had to happen. As they say, timing is everything. But I kind of look back, and while not having been here, these things all coming together, I think were sort of the culmination that allowed it to take off as it did. I think we had a good starting point too, and this is where I think others could learn. Maybe you can't go from 0 to 200 students in the first year, but we had engaged faculty that sparked those ideas for those pilot teams. Some of our competition teams were operating as purely extracurricular and often in garages off campus. So from a safety perspective, it was a liability to the university. From an educational experience, I don't think the students they didn't have a good framework to engage in these annual competitions. So we sort of brought them under the enterprise umbrella, which was a smart move. And I know a lot of universities seek out those competition teams or those experiences because they really align well with experiential learning. And we have the support of the engineering departments. And by that, I mean, forming those concentration options, swapping out the Capstone credits and whatnot. So all that was really coordinated from the outset. It wasn't like we built a program and then said, who wants to opt in? There's a coordinated effort. And I think this idea of choice and flexibility, I had already mentioned, but giving students choice, giving industry sponsors choice, i.e. in this case, do you want to engage with students earlier in project-based learning, maybe recognizing that they might not be at the same knowledge base as a capstone team, but they might be great for internships or co-ops. And then you can also bring them back, to your organization when they're not enrolled in project work. And it almost affords this year-round recruiting effort by plugging things like enterprise into recruiting like internships and co-ops back in the summer or the off times. And then for faculty, right, a different way to engage with students. Some faculty run the other way when you talk about experiential learning, and some run and they're the first in line. So it takes a special type of person. Time commitments certainly can be higher than a typical course, but again, choice and flexibility was a critical, a conscious decision of how we design the program. And then I think this dedicated industry role has always been key. So it's corporate relations, but in the academic side, as opposed to, say, the advancement or a separate unit outside of academics. We have an internal governing board that it's kind of like an advisory board, but governing gives it a little more strength into helping me work through policy and curriculum changes. The fact that we're a small high STEM university with a large industry network, I think, was also led to the ability to develop something like this. And I'll quickly go through these. I know we're running low on time, but where are we going next? We want to engage more first-year students. We've made a conscious decision to limit first years to the second semester they're here because we don't want to overwhelm them with project-based learning, but we're rethinking that as as a program. So we're going to offer a enterprise exploration course for first year, first semester freshmen, get them involved in a 1 credit course that's pass fail. So the stakes are pretty low, but it's to get them really exposed and to explore their interests. Like I had talked about the retention metrics for participation in enterprise. Everybody wants to see this program impact earlier retention, not things like third year retention. That first to second year is often critical, where if you don't engage the student, they might be at risk, right? If they don't feel like they belong here. So the next thing is going beyond Capstone. And by that, there's an initiative through this Idea Hub, which is like a curriculum incubator of sorts here. It's an interdisciplinary group on campus, but they're revamping our Gen Ed program, and it's being redefined as essential education instead of general education. But the idea being that if they can build pathways and capstone experiences within the Gen Ed program, enterprise could possibly satisfy those requirements. And if that were the case, then enterprise truly could be attainable for all students, because it could be a recognized pathway to satisfy Gen Ed requirements. And right now, there's nothing across the board in place like that. So we're working together to develop that over the next probably year or so here. And then some operational refinements. So faculty recognition and credit, it kind of varies depending on where they sit for their advising role in enterprise. Working with David's team on some software. I don't know if I have time, David. I know we're getting short here, but maybe I'll just briefly mention, using EduSourced as a platform that all of our enterprises could use to manage their projects and their multi-projects, and having a dashboard from the program level that I can look across all of those. Right now, I just don't have that, because the program has been kind of erred on the side of let the teams develop their tools and methods. And then revisiting our funding model. We're sort of a victim of our own success. So the university likes us to keep sustaining ourselves, through external sources, but I think there's a balance there. And then coordinating external engagement. So our liaison, maybe working with the broader advancement and other corporate relations folks, and helping mobilize that group a little more deliberately here at Michigan Tech. So I'll stop there.
There were a few interesting questions that popped up. So a couple of them were under one big banner, which is about your partnership support. So Peter Schuster asked, curious about funding model. Can you elaborate? Similarly, Bill Jemison, is the corporate support structured as gift, grant, or contract? And Maki Habib asked what kind of support you get from your partner. So just any overview you give there?
Yeah. So we have a standard program fee, and it's consistent with our Capstone program, so that we're not competing on price, right? Like, for this price you could have enterprise, and for this one it's for senior design. So a student project carved out of an enterprise team or a team of Capstone seniors is typically on the order of 15 to 17,500. So there's a range there. That's for an academic year. The range is that gift versus contract question that came up. So we allow unrestricted, which it can be treated like a donation to the program and the university, or more commonly, the companies are asking about things like intellectual property and who owns that. So the restricted route under a formal project agreement with a little bit of university overhead, hence the higher price tag, it defines the restricted route. So two mechanisms, 2 price points based on that, if you will, and helping companies navigate that on the front end as part of that industry liaison position. And then what was the third part of that question?
I already cleared it because I was moving to the next question. I'm sorry.
Hopefully I answered.
Did you mention if it was a grant or the structure? You mentioned that.
Yeah, so it can either be like a donation, like an unrestricted, like a tax deductible, although we're not supposed to give advice on that, but it can be a donation, or it can be more of a grant or a contract, so where it would be under a formal agreement. And typically that's to define who owns any intellectual property that might come out of the project.
Okay. And Karen Larson asked, what type of training do you put in place for your faculty advisors? So I know your faculty advisor is really important to the program. So I love that question. And then is it a significant teaching load for the faculty? How do you execute contracts with companies? You already touched on that. Do companies put money in? You touched on that. But those first two parts.
Yeah, so we haven't had to do a lot with the faculty development because we haven't had a lot of turnover, but actually I'm seeing some turnover, and some of it's probably COVID, but other factors. But we have to probably focus on some of that, like onboarding new advisors. Typically it's somebody retires and somebody else comes in. So maybe I should clarify too, this isn't like a year to year commitment where every year we're asking somebody, are you still going to do this? They've kind of bought in for the long haul unless something major changes. So there's some continuity there, but I'm finding some turnover due to retirements and other things that is requiring more emphasis on that onboarding. So we have a program manual, we have some resources, but we meet amongst all the advisors 3 times a semester. I try to meet with the new advisors to kind of onboard them and have a cohort. But like I said, that's been like 1 or 2 here and there up until recently, where we're starting to see a few changes. But then the time commitment, yeah, I think this is a challenge because, you know, some people are spending probably 10 hours a week, maybe or more, and it's nominally like 1.5 credits on the books. So we also provide an advising incentive that comes out of those industry monies. So some IRAD money of sorts to the faculty member, coupled with teaching credit, kind of makes them whole. But I think there's an opportunity there.
So I'm going to do just really quick, and then we've got a couple other questions. I'm going to cover things that from our benchmark survey that are relevant to what Rick has been talking about. And we do this every year. So if you've participated, as many of you have, thank you. And if not, there's a link at the end if you want to contribute. So we asked how many of the programs who participate in our survey do any level of multidisciplinary experiential learning. And so the 31% is the only no. Everything else is yes. It's just a matter of if we're talking about across colleges or just within a college. And there wasn't much change this year. We saw multidisciplinary go up and up and up. 2020 stabilized, and it's been pretty much flat since. So I think we're just pretty much saturated at experiential learning. If we break it out, or sorry, at multidisciplinary, if we break it out by engineering and by business, it's just so close. It's almost not worth talking about. I was really surprised by that over the years. But I think just both disciplines recognize the need for them. We surveyed schools outside of engineering and business, but there's just in smaller numbers. This question, though, we do get differences across disciplines, and that is, do you have a formal director or office of experiential learning? And overall, almost half do. We're seeing increases year over year. But then when you break it out, by far business leads here. And I say lead, I don't know if everybody needs it. Rick represents, you know, what you would think of as a director of experiential learning. It's a specific type, but that's a dedicated resource to help with that, and with an office and everything else. I kind of think of this in 3 stages. Stage 1 would be you have experiential learning, but sort of organic in nature. It's not particularly organized top down in any way. And then there's stage 2, which is you have someone who owns it, but it might be part of a dual role. We see that a lot in the early days of establishing these offices. It would start with an associate dean who helped organize experiential learning. Stage 3 being a full director or office where that is their only role. And I have some kind of theories on why business is so far out in front of engineering, but I don't know if anyone cares about that, but basically engineering's got the deeper, richer history with project-based learning. So they sort of figured out how to do it on their own, and business came about later on, maybe learned some things from engineering and leapfrogged in some ways toward having an office and having a little more support, but maybe just doesn't have quite as deep a history. But at the end of the day, this continues to rise year over year in engineering and business. And I think we've still got some more years of growth. And then the final question I thought would be relevant to what we're talking about: where do projects come from? They largely come from faculty. For 4 years of collecting this info, this has not changed. Alumni, clearly. So, pay attention to where your projects are coming from. This is the one thing that's changed the most in 4 years, and that's the office of experiential learning. Even though there weren't a lot of new ones established this year, I think we're seeing offices that were established a couple of years ago finally really get traction and become really big and recruiting project-based learning. So I still think that's the future, but it's taking a little while to get there. And then the last thing, this is the link for the survey. So if you haven't contributed to that data set, that's it for me. And then I think there was one more question, Rick, if you want to address it. Let me pull that up. Question was, how many support staff do you have for the two full-time employees? Are these positions permanent, or do you have to worry about raising funding each year? I know you mentioned this was a sustainable program, but that's a question from Diane Welsh.
Yeah, I saw that too, Diane. So right now, like my position is general funded, but I have two staff. One is the industry liaison, and then we have a program coordinator that's more of a student facing role. So we've kind of divided it into between sort of campus facing and external facing, although there's overlap there too. But those are both, funded out of the external monies. So, that's a year over year. That one position really bears the brunt of, sustaining themselves and the other, their coordinator colleague. We have support staff from the associate provost office, at least I would say 2 or 3 people kind of part-time helping us, but also helping some of these other programs in the associate provost office. So just administrative things like helping us with, managing funds, right? We've got all these accounts because we've got all these teams, the transmittals, the proposals. So there's support there, but it's, partial support from different roles that also help other programs. So it's a pretty lean office in that regard. But that's where I was alluding to trying to shift maybe the university into investing more into this program, but it's kind of hard when you've been successful for 20 plus years without asking for more support. But I think that retention equation has value to the university. So we're trying to be strategic about, showing the impact of the program instead of just working so hard to provide a great experience and not having any time to tell people what we're doing. We're trying to position the program maybe a little more at the university level to see the value of it.
And I'm going to try and summarize this one last question. Due to the different, I've wondered this too, due to the different background of your students enrolled, how is the Knowledge Foundation coordinated to bridge those different backgrounds?
Yeah, that's a good question. We really, I don't know that there's like a one size fits all, but we rely on the students and the faculty advisor to do that onboarding and to sort of, so there's some within enterprise sort of resource to help with that. But I think also some of those module courses help with that. So we have like a teaming course, we have a leadership course, we have a project management course. So they have access to resources through our module courses, but also within the standards and sort of onboarding methods that the enterprise team that they join has. I know in my super mileage team, I have sort of a boot camp kind of series of self-paced modules within my project course that new members go through to kind of help them get grounded and start off somewhere. But it's the student mentoring too. I think it's peer-to-peer mentoring. So it's less about the advisor having all the answers and the students kind of organically putting that together, but then the advisor helping them along the way, because that could also be disastrous if it's just, there's no feedback loop, but it tends to work itself out.
Okay. And I know we ran a few minutes late. For those of you that hung on with us, appreciate it. Thank you for the questions. And Rick, thank you for sharing about your program and going into depth. It's something, a few schools have something in some ways analogous to this, I think, but I just talk to people all the time that would like to do more experiential learning that is multidisciplinary and maybe even a little more student led. And certainly, and you touched on it in a big way earlier, getting into the earlier students, the first years, the second years, the third years, so many benefits, and you covered them all, so I won't rehash that. But thanks for sharing everything. The recording for this will be posted online at EduSourced.com, and I'll send out an email once that's live. And yeah, if you have any follow-up questions you've forgotten about afterward, you can email me at david@edusourced.com, or you can find Rick on LinkedIn and get in touch. And thanks again for coming. We'll see you all soon.
Yeah, thank you again. And I would just reiterate that. Yeah, reach out if there's a burning question. I'm always willing to spend time following up outside the time constraints we had here. So appreciate everyone's time. And thank you, David.
Thank you. Thanks, Rick. Take care, everyone.
All right.